This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
What's up, Real MVPs, Ricky Widmer here, along with the one, the only, Brandon Swanson.
Hey.
And we are back for another edition of the Primetime Podcast right here on Most Valuable Podcast. Brandon, your one-stop shop for what two sports do we cover?
We cover basketball and football.
Of the college variety. Thank you guys for joining us either of the YouTube variety or on podcast services around the world. I actually found something interesting the other day, Brandon, is because we are on TuneIn, you know what you could do? Do you have an Alexa at home?
I don't.
Or have you ever thought about getting an Alexa?
I haven't.
We are not sponsored by Alexa, by the way.
Not yet.
The reason why I bring it up is my mom has recently gotten an Alexa.
Does she like her?
And she does. She got a second one for the other room. That's how much she liked Alexa. But I was just, for shits and giggles, was like, oh, well, what if I tried to search our podcast? And I went, hey, Alexa, play the Primetime Podcast. Because we were on TuneIn Radio, guess what I could listen to through my Alexa? Any MVP podcast. You can say any MVP. The only one that me and Alexa were kind of fighting over is the onside kick, because I kept saying play the onside kick, and she kept saying there's no sidekick podcast. So she wasn't really understanding my
Apparently she wasn't getting it.
I was like, Alexa, play the onside kick. And she's like, there is no the sidekick podcast. I was like, forget it. I got the rest of them to play. But fun fact I found out. So we're on TuneIn. You can listen to the podcast on your Alexa devices. Also, if you're on iTunes and Apple Podcasts, which I know most people do have an iTunes account, make sure to go and give the Primetime Podcast a rate and a review. It really helps us out. The positive ratings that we get really help us out and make sure that more people can see this. And also, we have finally, at this point, I think, covered up that bad rating we got like a year or two ago, where we were technically a couple of good old boys, which we might be for this first segment because we're talking about the SEC. But please go and rate and review the Primetime Podcast and all the other MVP podcasts on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. We got a jam-packed show. We're going to be talking about college basketball. We're making a sandwich. Usually we do this on the Rick and Johnny podcast. We're going to do it on the PTP. We're going to talk about college basketball. Look at the Kentucky Wildcats, who had a big win this past week over the number one team in the nation, the Tennessee Volunteers. Then we're going to go into NFL draft territory and take a look at Marquise Brown, who had a foot surgery surgery on his foot, I should say, for an injury that he's had. He will not be at the Combine, won't be at OU's Pro Day. How will that affect his draft stock? That's what we're going to look at. And then we're going to bring it back to the hardwood for the end to talk a little bit about the Nevada Wolfpack, who right now, I believe, are the 7th team in the nation and are a 4 seed in Joe Lunardi's bracketology. But Brandon, we'll start with those Kentucky Wildcats. And this is a team that, except for the Louisville game and except for the Alabama game, have not lost since they lost in overtime December 8th to Seton Hall. The only SEC teams to get the better of them has been Alabama. That was a 2-point loss. They lose to LSU on the February 12th, 2-point loss, 2 close games. They have some big wins over North Carolina, who was ranked, Mississippi State, Auburn, Kansas, and now Tennessee. The question I want to ask you is, right now, Kentucky is sitting on the 2 line with teams like Michigan State, teams like Michigan, and teams like North Carolina. But I want to ask you, when we get to the end of the year and we get to Selection Sunday, will Kentucky end up being a 1 seed in March Madness?
I think that we could see Kentucky do that, and the team that they most likely would be jumping would probably be Gonzaga. Mm-hmm. But Kentucky's going to have to go the rest of the way, finish out things strong. I believe that they can. The only other ranked team right now is Tennessee. They'll have to play Tennessee again, who's shown this year that they are a really good basketball team. They've been number 1 for a couple of weeks, or they were number 1 for a couple of weeks, no longer number 1, ranked number 5 right now. But this is a Tennessee team that's shown a lot of talent, that's shown a lot of fight, a lot of grit. So that'll be a tough one, especially because it's on the road at Tennessee. They beat Tennessee, yes, but they did it at home, 86-69. But it was a pretty good butt whooping. I will say 17 points. That's pretty big. But you do have to then just take care of the rest of your business. If you do that, you position yourself in a really good spot for that number 1 seed. I think Kentucky could definitely do it. I think that there certainly are people out there who are going to say, no, Kentucky is locked in, but they're locked in as a number 2, and they're not going to be moving. But Kentucky and Michigan, probably the 2 most likely teams to be able to make a jump to a number 1 seed.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is that everyone's going to say the Zags are the ones that are going to be jumped only because of the non-conference, or the conference, I should say, that they play. And plus, you look at their non-conference schedule, and 2 of their losses come against North Carolina, who's on the 2 line, and then more interestingly, that Tennessee team that Kentucky also has beaten. Now, the one thing I think that's going to be interesting with Gonzaga is, and this is a Selection Sunday discussion, if you're looking at the Bulldogs and the Wildcats, one thing that you could throw out there in defense of the Bulldogs is, well, wait a second. Kentucky lost to Duke to open the year. The Zags actually beat Duke on a neutral site. It wasn't like, and I think that the Kentucky game was also on a neutral site, as that was the State Farm Classic, I believe it was. But could that be, I'll ask you, could that be something that they look at on Selection Sunday that goes, hey, you know what? Yes, I know Kentucky beat Tennessee once, maybe twice, depending on how that other game, the next one, goes. But look at Duke has been a team. Let's say Duke is the top overall seed by the end of the year. Could the committee go, hey, well, Kentucky lost to this Duke team. Gonzaga beat them. I'm
going to say no, only because that was their very first game of the year. And yeah, it was a butt whooping by
Kentucky.
Duke. Yeah, it was a butt whooping by Duke, 118-84. But I think at the same time, Kentucky was still trying to get their bearings on everything. And they came out against a Duke team that was certainly inspired and showed how much talent they have this season. And that's a lot of talent. And all of their players, all of their scorers scored. Everything went well for Duke, and not everything went well for the Kentucky Wildcats. So I don't think that they're going to hold that against Kentucky too much, even with Gonzaga being able to beat the Blue Devils still early in the season when they did that. I think that ultimately ends up being some sort of wash.
Now, another thing I'm going to look at, and really quick, I got to pull up the ACC tournament bracket to see how everything kind of lays out right now. But one thing you got to look at is Virginia and Duke. They're both on the 1 line, or the number 1 seed line, but they are also going to probably play each other, or could play each other again in the ACC tournament, the conference tournament. And right now, based on the standings that we have for the ACC, and this could all change, is Duke is 1, Virginia's 2, North Carolina is 3. Now, I say this could all change because I expect Duke to end up being the number 1 overall seed because, A, they went ahead and beat Virginia twice, but something that could throw a wrench into that is they play North Carolina twice to end the year. Not only do they play North Carolina twice to end the year, they're going to play on the road this time at Syracuse. They're going to play that Syracuse Orange team that beat them in overtime at Duke, I should say, at the with the Cameron Crazies there on Mike Krzyzewski court, Coach K court. That is something that North Carolina, like, part of my head goes, yeah, Duke's going to roll them just because of what Duke has been doing all year. But then there's a part of me that goes, and we say this in college football, and we use it also in college basketball, when you get to these rivalry games, throw everything you know out the window because these teams are going to come to play. Like North Carolina could come into that game going, you know what? This is our Super Bowl. This is our national championship, especially if they lose on February 20th. They could come in March 9th and say, hey, you know what? We might not be able to knock off to be the number 1 seed, but let's go ahead and knock off this team going into the tournament to give us some confidence going in, but also kind of maybe shake the confidence of Duke. I don't think that would work exactly like that. It might help the Tar Heels, but I don't think it's shaking the confidence of Duke, because even when they lost to Syracuse, it's like, oh, what are they going to do? Boom, they win by 2 against Virginia and go on another win streak. But could the ACC kind of help Kentucky kind of figure out where their seeding is going to be, either 1 and 2? And in the end, is it maybe a Virginia team that falls if they lose to, I know I didn't mention, they play Louisville twice, who they played Duke tough, if I can get that out of my head. They played Duke tough, so I'm assuming maybe they could play Virginia tough as well. Am I right to even think about that? And could the ACC be a huge impact effector? That's a weird term, but I'm throwing it out anyways, with Kentucky and their seeding.
Well, I don't think that I think right now the Virginia Cavaliers are going to be locked in.
The 2 seed in their conference tournament.
I think that they're kind of locked in right now with. I think they'll be a number 1 come the national tournament. Mm-hmm. I think that they're a 2 in their own tournament. They're the number 2 team in their tournament, right behind Duke. That's that's not happening at all. Duke is staying number 1, remaining number 1. It is going to be interesting, that ACC tournament, and to see what happens there, to see who comes out on top. Is it going to be Duke? If it's not Duke, I'm going to be a little nervous. Mm-hmm. If it's not Duke, I'm nervous for them come tournament time, because they are supposed to be this team. I guess they're the favorite. There's no reason why Duke doesn't come out on top. If they don't, there's an issue there. Something obviously went wrong. But I think that most of this, to me, in my mind, is kind of locked in right now. Duke's going to be a number 1 seed. Virginia's going to be a number 1 seed, in my mind. Gonzaga and even Tennessee are questions to me, because if Tennessee loses again to Kentucky, if Tennessee loses any other games, why couldn't Kentucky then jump over Tennessee? Tennessee goes to the 2, Kentucky goes to the 1. Then Gonzaga stays, or Michigan, possibly, how they finish out their season, jumps over Gonzaga, and they go to the 1. Gonzaga's then at 2. So those are some different things that I'm looking at. Locked in right now at a 1 are Duke and Virginia. Tennessee and Gonzaga, in my mind, not locks at this point.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring up because first off, I will say this. If you're sitting there going, guys, this is a Kentucky segment, what the hell are you guys doing talking so much on the ACC? All of this kind of is interchangeable, and it's kind of like ebbs and flows of like something happens in the ACC, it's going to affect Tennessee. It's going to affect Kentucky. And the interesting thing I was going to say something about the ACC and how it affects it, but I'm going to go on this kind of tangent because you mentioned Tennessee. They don't just play Kentucky to end the season. They also play their lone game against LSU, who right now, to me, it's a 3-dog race in the SEC for the top spot. You've got Kentucky, you've got Tennessee, and you've got LSU. And LSU, if they're able to, when Tennessee comes to town, if they're able to beat the Volunteers, that will only help the Tigers. Because right now, as we enter, we're recording this on Monday night, February 18th. The standings entering tonight are LSU 11-1, tied with Tennessee 11-1, and then you've got the Kentucky Wildcats at 10-2. If Tennessee, let's say, just loses that LSU game, well, they are on the 2 line in their own conference tournament. If they win out, they'll be on the 1 line. If they lose both to Kentucky and LSU, then they'll be on the 3 line in their conference tournament. And the thing I find most interesting about the game from this past weekend, and I know Kentucky will probably try to do it again. It'll be interesting if LSU tries to do this. Kentucky limited Grant Williams, a guy who on Saturday before the game, I was talking praises on the fast break because we did our mock draft. They only limited him to 4 shots in that game. He went 3 of 4 from the field, 2 of those being 3-pointers, 8 of 9 from the line. So without those 8, he would have only finished with 8 points on the day. This is a guy who is averaging 6 makes and about 10 to 11 field goals, shots per game. They limited him to 4. They bum rushed him and said, hey, you know what? We're taking you out of the game. We're going to let someone else beat us, if anything. And I wonder if LSU tries to do the same thing of, hey, let's go ahead and try to just take him out of the game. Let Admiral Schofield try to beat us because one of them can't beat us. Only 2 of them can.
No, I agree with you there. I think it's going to be interesting as to what happens the rest of the way. We've gotten to the point where, okay, we went through the season. We're at the beginning. Yeah, okay, this team's, doing well or this team's struggling. They'll pick it back up. You've got the whole middle of this. We haven't even reached the middle of the season yet, and then boom. We're at the middle. Okay, now let's see who's got the stretch run. We are at the point past the stretch run. Who's going to do well in these final couple of games? Who's going to do well in the games that a lot of people are watching? Because a loss here, a bad loss, that shows up on your resume, that could really hurt you. A big win, a good win, that can really bump you to the next level. That's where we're at. And like you mentioned, Ricky, you brought up the game that they also have against LSU. That's on February 23rd. That's coming right up. That's Saturday. That's going to be a big game, and it's on the road. It's at LSU. And this is an LSU team that Kentucky just lost to. It's going to be a big one. If Tennessee loses there, and then Tennessee loses at home against Kentucky, Tennessee's hold on a number 1 seed, it's fallen.
Well, and the thing
it's certainly fallen in their own conference then as well.
And the thing I think it comes down to, and this is kind of the ultimate answer I have for this, is whether or not Kentucky will be a 1 seed in March Madness in the NCAA tournament comes down to what we see from the SEC tournament and what we see from the ACC tournament. End of the year and in the tournament, because I'll start with the SEC first because that's where Kentucky's at. I read the standings off just not too long ago. You've got LSU 1, Tennessee 2, Kentucky 3. It is super important that, especially for LSU and Tennessee, because they kind of control their own destinies in a sense because they are a 1-loss and Kentucky is a 2-loss in conference. LSU, besides maybe Florida, Alabama, maybe a Vanderbilt could sneak a win, the only tough team, and I know that in conference play anyone can sneak a win from you, the only ranked team they have left is Tennessee. Kentucky, same thing. Yeah, they play Auburn. Yeah, they play Florida at the end of the year. But they've got Tennessee as the only ranked team on their schedule. And like I said, Tennessee's got to play LSU and they have to play Kentucky to end the year. And if you're not that number 1 seed, the odds are, let's say they end like they are now, LSU has the biggest advantage because LSU, if, let's say, all the top seeds win out, that means LSU is playing Ole Miss in their first game, are playing Ole Miss in the semifinals to go to the championship, whereas Tennessee and Kentucky would have to play again. So for me, it's you got to get that number 1 seed in the SEC because I'll let the other 2 beat each other up, where I'm hopefully waiting on the other side in a championship game. And then in the ACC, and this is interesting only because I'm not going to play the woulda, coulda, shoulda game, Virginia's playing right now as we're recording this. Virginia Tech, right now, 17-58, 33-32. And I know that game's going to be finished by the time this goes up, so I'm not going to play huge into, what happens if that wins or losses. But based off of where we're at right now, Duke, Virginia, UNC, Virginia Tech, those are the top 4 seeds in it. That means Duke would play Virginia Tech, Virginia would play UNC. More importantly also, the 8-9 game, Duke would play the winner of that. If the 8 seed wins that game, guess who the 8 seed is right now? NC State, a team that could give Duke problems at that next level. And even let's say Louisville wins their first game, Louisville beats Virginia Tech, then Duke, even as the one,
for that.
has to play Louisville for that. Possibly in the semifinal. So these are the 2 tournaments I'm kind of looking at, because for me, how I see it playing out is either if Duke plays Virginia for the ACC crown, both of them will be 1 lines. And that's what I think will end up happening. I got Duke and Virginia on the 1 line. I've got Gonzaga still on the 1 line because they're going to win out. I feel like they're going to win out. They're going to win their conference tournament. It's going to be really hard to not give them a number 1 seed. And then it's going to come down to 2 things for me. It's going to come down to how did Kentucky finish, and how did at that point, it's going to come down to how did Kentucky finish compared to Tennessee, and if LSU, let's say LSU won the SEC tournament, then to me it comes down to, okay, what did Michigan State and Michigan do? Because if Kentucky falls short and Tennessee doesn't win that SEC tournament crown, expect a team like maybe Michigan or Michigan State to steal that final 1 seed.
And see, but that's also why I'm looking at the Big Ten tournament a little bit as well. You kind of have to keep an eye.
That's the third one that's kind of out there.
I know it's kind of the quote-unquote lesser when you're looking at the ACC and the SEC, especially.
I always like the
especially
Big Ten
right now. I know you love the Big Ten tournament, but Illinois is never worth anything in it. But
it's usually good basketball.
But you have nothing to say on the Illinois part. So
Ayo.
Here's the part is that depending on how things go, ACC and SEC, how things shake up with Gonzaga, look for Michigan. Can Michigan come out and win the Big Ten tournament? And if they do that, Michigan could secure themselves a 1 seed. And it's a longer shot, I think, for Michigan, but they could do it. I think that there's more of an opportunity for Kentucky to sneak in, because Kentucky, depending on what happens with Tennessee and how they play, both in the same conference, both Tennessee, Kentucky, SEC. If Tennessee loses to Kentucky, if Tennessee loses to LSU, I see Kentucky bouncing right over them and taking the number 1 seed from them, and Tennessee slipping right to where Kentucky was at a 2.
Now, here's a question for you, and I'm going to ask you this on the podcast. For, I believe this session is 2 games. How does $183 say to you for a Big Ten semifinal? Because we could go to the Big Ten tournament, Brandon, see the 2 semifinal games for $183 a pop, row 5, in the upper deck.
Doesn't sound too bad.
Pretty good.
Doesn't sound too bad.
Same amount of seats.
It's the fact of being there.
Yeah, same amount of seats that Dave, Sean, and I went to for the Bulls. Because it is at...
Why would you go to a Bulls game?
Oh, it's at the UC this year.
Why would you put yourself through a Bulls game?
Well, it's Dave's birthday, and Dave wanted to... It was all for Dave's birthday, plus we got to see Paul George miss a game winner, so I guess that was
That's
nice.
okay. I'm kidding. I'm going to a Bulls game as well. We're going to see the Lakers and the Bulls.
Ooh,
March 12th.
LeBron James. Yeah. Lonzo Ball. I wish Lonzo Ball was in a Bulls jersey. But $183, we'll keep that in our back pocket. Row 5, section 317. We could see the 2 semifinal games March 16th. Or we could go to the championship game on the 17th. I didn't look up what those ticket prices are. But any final thoughts on Kentucky before we move into some NFL draft talk?
No, I think we got it covered. I'm just very interested to see how we'll probably be revisiting this point very, very shortly within the next couple of weeks to check back in.
Then let's do this to put a final end on it. I kind of gave mine. Let's do our rough draft prediction number 1, because these will change after, like, right before the conference tournaments. Who the 1 seeds are, who we think they'll be Selection Sunday. I'm going to go Duke. I am going to go Gonzaga. I am going to go Kentucky, Virginia. That's what I'm going to do. No particular order. Those are my 1 seeds. Duke, Zags, Cavaliers, Wildcats. Could change after the regular season.
I'm going to go with Duke, Kentucky, Virginia, and Gonzaga.
Okay. Did you just go the same as me?
I think I did. I think I did, but I'm thinking
Usually
about it.
we don't agree.
I just don't know if Michigan's going to have enough, and
I would love for them to be a 1
if
seed.
Gonzaga is able to finish out things the right way, how they would like to. I think they're going to be locked in there. But if they have a misstep and Michigan continues to kind of roll, we could be seeing Michigan flip-flop them. So we'll see.
And who knows, maybe the Tar Heels beat the Duke Blue Devils in one of their games. But this is where you guys come in. Let us know what you think down below in that comment section. Will Kentucky be a 1 seed? How do the 1 seeds kind of play out in your mind? Let us know what you're thinking in that comment section.